So it is early morning in Los Angeles and not such an early morning in New York. And I am with DC Copeland, who has recently introduced herself to me. And we had a sort of introductory conversation because I really appreciated the email you sent me and your ability to write and clarify yourself and express what you're doing. And I also wanted to be sure when we got together that you had an understanding of what I was interested in doing here, which you certainly did. And we had, I think, a conversation that well would have sufficed for what we're doing today.
I think so too, Jack. I do.
Yeah, I think it was an hour and a half and it was like 3 minutes and just sort of a blur. So I really appreciate it. And I appreciate you coming. I know that things are happening in New York generally that would be very captivating. And I know New York's one of my favorite cities. I relax there better than anywhere else because I know that everyone else is worried enough. I can see it on their faces that I take a day off. So uh,
Ah,
anyway, welcome.
thank you, Jack. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the work you do, and I'm excited to be here and have our conversation.
So maybe you can announce, pronounce, express, share what you are doing in the broadest sense in your
So,
expression of your experience.
what I'm trying to do with my writing is to be a voice that represents the soul, that is testifying in these dark times, that we're living in a time where many people, the collective energy is that it's a dark time. And if what I can clarify and articulate is that it's not necessarily a dark time, that there is a light that every single one of us is part of, and to connect to that consciousness of that light, that awareness of that light, and give voice to it. So that when you're reading, it's as if I'm articulating that voice that you also possess. Um, I'm definitely someone who is an intellectual. I enjoy critical thinking. I enjoy, and that's rare these days. I find people are very afraid to think, to own their thoughts, to control, to be able to consciously know that we can control the direction of our thoughts. Um, and I like to be somebody that represents the possibility of being able to do that, and the possibility of being able to transcend the everyday collective milieu of the mind. So that's what the purpose of my kind of mission statement would be. Um, I call myself a societal dropout, and what I really mean by that is that I'm dropping out of the um, collective darkness and shared stories of doom and destruction that are currently circulating in present day culture.
And probably have through history. Mythology and superstition has largely been built on this magical notion that somehow the universe is mysterious while we're creating a mystery in our own thinking about it.
So true. So true. That's why you
Yeah.
get these gods, right? And we're supposed to look to the gods for intervention, you know, to
Yeah.
somehow come down and help us from this muck, as opposed to being like, well, what's the muck? What's going on? Why am I creating the muck? Where's the God in me? The um One of the most influential people in my life said, when I was, and I was so eager to hear this when I was about 21, he said, God is dwelling in the right side of your heart, center of your chest. It's not out there, it's right in here. That
Mhm.
just like clicked. I was like, yes, yes, that that's it. It's here.
Well, in an absolute sense, it would be here for us as humans because we're in a time space bound capsule, a spacesuit. I heard a 80-year-old woman referred to it as once. Our bodies are spacesuit. And yet, in that ultimate sense, an absolute essence wouldn't be in space and time at all. So it could be within us and it would also be without us,
I love that. Yeah.
meaning it doesn't require thinking. Thinking's a product of it rather than the creator of it.
It's between me and you right now. It's not, there's
Yeah.
absolutely no, the boundaries are just our flesh and our bodies, but we are not just our bodies.
Well, our body is the brain. I mean, our brain occupies we sort of think often of as the brain as being distinct from the body, when in fact it's the CPU of the body. It's the master control unit of the body. What do I do with what the body tells me? My body is filled with senses and nerves. We've got almost 35 miles of nerves in a body. That means we really do have a lot of nerve. And to not notice the potential of that information is coming through. My brain is monitoring it, saying, what's the best I can do for survival?
Yeah.
And if I'm
And
thinking in terms that are wrong about that absolute nature, I'm already causing an effect that feels wrong because my body knows it's wrong. And to think that I need to overcome it and feel better about that is all about what addiction is, and this mental obsession of thinking somehow I need to fix it within the context of thinking, rather than see that thinking is the thing causing the problem. My misuse of thinking is causing the problem to begin with.
especially with like the addiction of craving to fix it, like craving that I have to do something, and that we're
Yes.
wired to think we need to be doing something all the time. And that, we're human, like I love that phrase, we're human beings, not human doings.
Right.
But what you said, the idea of this, like we have this CPU unit, and what do we do when it gets like, or that it can be dysfunctional, and that we're teaching it to be dysfunctional.
Exactly. We're asking for it to be dysfunctional because we're asking it to process dysfunctional thoughts. And the processor was designed by reality to express reality, not insanity.
And yet so many people share with me that they're tired of living, that they're not enough, that,
Yes.
um, I've been part of a lot of mental health forums recently, and the stuff people are saying is so sad. It's so sad. How do I live anymore? I can't go on. Like, I,
Well, if you're thinking, I mean, I want to get back to the craving real quick. The craving is a natural consequence within the addictive community, the addiction as it's been defined through either Alcoholics Anonymous or any one of the other 150 different programs. It's defined as a physical allergy, which is an abnormal response, and an abnormal response is an automatic reaction, because a response on its own is a responsibility. Responsibility is the ability to respond, meaning consider, what am I doing? In thoughtful manners, not thoughtless manners. And if I'm thinking in terms that are desperate, I'm thinking now that I am those desperate terms. And I'm accurately thinking that there is nothing to live for because I'm thinking my life is based in a lie. And this whole imposter syndrome starts. And the mental craving, we talk about the craving being a physical bodily function, right? That
yeah,
in addiction, it's very common to talk about the craving being a physical function and the obsession being a mental function. Well, our brains happen to be the central computer for the body. Our brains are actually in the body, so they're also a physical component. So the craving in the
love that.
body is
Yeah.
the craving in the mind. What we call the mind, I would say it's the brain. I distinguish brain from mind. Mind being capital in all respects because it's absolute and it's shared by all, and it's the essence of life and existence itself. It's way beyond the universe because it isn't. It's within and without again.
I like that. I like the distinction you're making, the mind versus the brain. Yes. Yes.
So and to think of them as separate would be wrong too. But to just isolate them for a second, to consider that the brain's doing one thing and the knowing is something that isn't thinking. Knowing wouldn't think because it wouldn't have anything to think about because it already knows everything. What would it think about? It's just the
Mhm.
pure consciousness of potential, etc. But that craving, in my estimation, if lies don't exist outside the brains of humans and or any other species that can think about their thinking. So the lie is the ultimate addiction, because the idea that a lie only lasts as long as I think something that's true is false or something that's false is true. So I'm trying to claim the thing can be the only thing it can never be. And I set my brain off on an obsessive proof. I'm looking for proof all the time, which is a fight to turn something into what it can never be. And that's the mental obsession. And
That
it literally seems to drive people crazy. And I say, no, you don't need to be driven there.
you're already crazy. You're
It's
already
it's it's
crazy.
the thought you're having now about that is even being real enough to actually have anything to do with. The disillusion rather than the resolution is actually coming to terms with the fact that it's what I'm doing now that's causing it. It's not my history. My history, the present moment is the sum of everything that's ever happened for all of us. So if there's any hope to deal with the past, it's in the present.
I like the distinction you made that it's the impossibility. Can we talk more
Yes.
about that? That it's that what we're trying to do is impossible, and that's what makes it the insanity. That's the
Yes.
insanity. Well,
Well, the idea of impossible isn't a problem, but the idea of impossible is possible is a problem. The idea of wrong is not a problem, but the idea that wrong is right is the problem. The idea that I need to stop thinking wrong thoughts and that thinking is the problem is often the conclusion of what people hear when I talk about this. Well, you're asking me not to think. And I say, well, that isn't what I'm saying at all. But your imagination that not thinking is the goal tells me that you and I have thought thinking is only obsessive. And if it isn't obsessive, it is no longer useful. We've been doing it so long, we really believe that's what thinking is this obsessive, attached, clingy, sticky, gluey experience we're having that we seem not to be able to get out of. So when I think my thoughts are reality, I set off on a collision course with reality, but there is no collision with reality. There's only a collision in my own mentality.
when you said the idea, well, I want to say like this idea that like their thinking is not a problem in and of itself. I think that's really important for people to understand that like the thinking, the obsessive thinking that people are trying to get out of, um, that's not that's not the problem. The problem is trying to get out of it. Is that
Well, even more primary, the problem is thinking we're in it.
that's us identify
Yes.
with it?
So historically, we've treated effects. If I feel bad, I want to figure out how to get over feeling bad by feeling better. That's an addiction. What am I doing? I'm not looking at the cause, I'm looking at the effect. And medicine typically treats the effects. They give people, they say, here's your diagnosis. I'm going to give you something to feel better about what you're doing. They don't say, what could you possibly be thinking that might be causing that effect? Let's start there as a society. Let's start there as a species and say, what is it about our species that seems to be fractured along these same lines, divided by national interests and all these sort of patriotic duties and loyalties and allegiances that we've developed to act as though our group is right and everyone else is wrong? And they're so wrong, God has empowered us to kill them to stop that plague on earth. When in fact, it's the thinking we're doing about them that's causing the whole thing to begin with, which is why it continues. It isn't being seen accurately. So we're being dysfunctional in the approach to it. And I would say this mental addiction is a societal, when you talk about dropping out of society, it's beginning to disband the rumors that we need to maintain cultural mores and creeds and values that have no value. None. They're
No.
absolutely bankrupt and immoral because they have no basis in reality, only what we think about our thinking.
What do you think, like the idea, like I think we talked about it a little bit, but the idea of like laughing at your thoughts, like how should we treat them? How do we treat this mind, the not mind, this the let's say um the brain's functioning, the obsessive thinking that like goes around and around and around and even says to us stuff like we're bad people.
Because we believe it's real, we think we are the things we feel. Think of feelings now. If we have a brain and it's receiving all the sensory input that's happening of everything everywhere, because the immediacy of my experience is the totality of everything happening everywhere. It's pretty profound when you think of it in relation to feeling alone. You start
Mm,
realizing that feeling alone is actually feeling a thought that has no basis in reality. And the thought is so alone, not as to have low self esteem or feel less than, but to have no esteem and no point whatsoever. And we're trying to even give it credit by thinking, I have low self esteem. There's no esteem in it whatsoever. It's literal fantasy acting as reality.
oh, I love that. I love that. Yes. No,
So
that's
if we're
yeah.
looking at the cause and starting to say we think of the thoughts as happening to us, we think of the brain as doing it to us, we think of society as causing it for us, and we need to fix all of them while we're still maintaining the idea I have nothing to do with it.
I love it.
I'm
Love it.
irresponsible for it. And what's the next thought? My sense is the holy dysfunctional trinity, what I
Yes.
call the unholy
Yes.
trinity
The
is
unholy trinity.
I have nothing to do with it. There's nothing I can do about it. I can only go on continuing to do what I'm doing. It's exactly what addiction is about. And so when it comes to society, if I'm thinking, it's been interesting for me to realize that I've always had a really clear idea of what's wrong with the entire world, while I've been absolutely in doubt about what I'm doing. Now, now, how could I be so blatant as to think for everyone else and not notice that I'm really questioning? If I'm in doubt, that means I'm acting questionably, and I know it. I wouldn't
Mm,
be in doubt if I didn't know it. And
oh,
I'm
I
thinking
love
of the
that.
doubt as something to fix out there because I'm thinking of the effect as being the cause. I've got everything backward, exactly the way a lie is. The lie is claiming to be the only thing it can't be. That's the impossibility. If something is false, it's never going to be true. It's just false. If it's wrong, it's never going to be right. It's wrong. To think of it as right is a collision. In math, I think we talked about this the other day.
Yeah.
Minus times a positive is negative. It's attempting to negate reality in place of this seeming reality that I'm fixated on in my thinking and attached to, thinking my life depends on it, because all that I think I am is what I think. So I have to think obsessively to maintain that opinion, barring all other input, all other experience, all outside. The idea of being unconscious to it all is pretending that my only consciousness is the attention I'm paying to the insanity that I'm inducing.
What about this doubt? Because when I think every human being goes through doubt, the doubt. And I think a lot of what's going on right now in society, especially, I don't want to talk politics, but the election, I mean, a lot of people insecure. And I think, but not other people very secure. So whatever. But the bottom line being like, how do we not project our doubt outwards? And how do we wrestle with the question of our own doubt as something, and I would say it's a holy question. I would say if we can sit in our own self-doubt, then we are really um doing the work of being a human being as opposed to like a doer, as
Okay, so let's take that point though, because you're making it really clearly. If I'm feeling doubt and my feelings are effects of a cause, what would be the doubtful cause?
well, let's say let's unpack like an example.
You want me to give you one?
Sure.
Well, let's simplify it. So if we narrowed things down to individual instances, we'd be working forever, and forever, by the way, never comes. You can wait forever, you can work forever, and it will still be forever before it ever comes. So I don't think that's the goal of life because it's a torture chamber. So if the present nature is present and it's absolute in every respect, right now, always we're always where we are when we ever think anything at all. So right now would be worth talking about and how we're thinking about it. If I think about it as circumstantially and situationally, I'm going to be putting out fires my whole life thinking I'm getting better rather than seeing that the cause of the doubt is coming from a doubtful thought. And I don't even need to know the substance of the thought to know that it has no substance if I'm doubting it. My body's designed to transmit and express reality. So it knows when something isn't real. It gives me signs and alarms. And what do? Wait for God to send a sign. We're getting them constantly based on the makeup of our actual human body. It's telling us you're thinking something that is doubtful. Now, if I can apply that, all of a sudden, all the variations of examples are handled in the one principled idea that doubt is being cast. Shadows of doubt are blocking the light. That absolute pure light of knowing is, I'm creating cloud cover, literally trying to hide under the clouds and saying the sun's not out, when in fact the sun is always out beyond the clouds. Sun never goes away. It's our impression of the sun going away because we're beneath the clouds. If my thinking is cloudy because I'm thinking thoughts that aren't true and I'm making believe they're reality, I've literally got foggy notions in my head, and that's what clouds are, is basically fog condensed, of creating a seeming block that's completely illusory. It's a complete dream. I'm acting on it as though it's reality, like when I'm sleeping at night. When I wake up in the morning, I say, "Oh, that was a dream. Good. What a relief." What do I
Oh,
do during the
yes.
day? I'm not sleeping. This is my eyes are open. I'm awake. I'm not sleeping. I got to fix this. This is reality. It isn't. It's a dream. Spiritual awakening is awakening to the fact that the spirit hasn't changed, but my manipulation and my own thinking is constantly affecting my mentality. And I'm blaming God and spirit and the whole world, everyone, but my own actions.
I love this. I like the idea of like the awakening of the dream, the awakening of the dream and and the level of the thoughts and the milieu and and even this idea of what we keep telling ourselves and what we keep telling ourselves in society. Like I get the New York Times every morning, and I'll tell you very honestly, it's like when I'm looking at these pages, it's so negative. Everything is very negative, and it's very much like this is the problem with this, and this is the problem with that. And we're so conditioned to be focused on these problems. And you kind of, if you put it in print, this is another thing about writing. If you put something in print, it seems to become more real, more tangible. It can be like communicated and shared. I mean, one of the things that I hope to do is like write and have it be like a disruption, like in the normal negative programming, because you
Consider when when you have thoughts in your head, they're always floating and changing. Always.
yes,
They're just in a
yes,
process. You
yes,
put it on paper, it gives them a place to live, a permanent place. They won't change on that
please.
paper until you change them. But you also know in writing that if you're writing well, you're constantly editing. You can read something that was perfect yesterday that you find there's some holes, there's some added views, there's a little bit, because it will never, the knowingness isn't limited by the vocabulary or the thinking we do. So to convey inspiration would seem impossible within writing until you begin to concede that if that knowing nature is nature, it is everyone's nature everywhere. And when I start thinking in those terms, I no longer imbue society with a sense of impossibility, but simply see it as dysfunctioning on the basis of this collective idea that's just simply not true. Now everyone is capable of recovery. Everybody is capable of actually
Coming home.
expressing that because we're already doing it. It's not something we're not doing. It's something that we're doing. We're working hard to pretend we're not doing to sustain and support the contention of our thinking being reality.
What do you think of this concept of coming home to yourself? People say that a lot, like coming home. Is that like Kansas and dark, like we're talking about waking up from the dream, and it's like, no, it's kind of like waking up from the dream. Um,
Well, it's realizing that we've never been asleep.
our true self is our
Right.
real
But
self.
why do we talk so much about our untrue self?
Yes.
If the true, when people come to me and say, I'm looking for my true self, I say, stop looking. What is there to look for? If it was true,
Right.
there's no other option. That's the essence.
That's the essence of who you are, and the rest is what do you say it is? It's a mistake. It's a it's
Well,
a,
it's an illusion
a
being thought of as
delusion, a
reality, which
dream.
is delusional. You can't be disillusioned if it's not an illusion. So
You can't.
we're
Yeah.
even Shakespeare, to our conversation, talked about it being, he talked about that self being what we think of it. There is no, I forget the exact term, but there is no right or wrong, but to how we see it or think of it.
Well, that's the whole idea of like the self-awareness of Hamlet. One of the things
Yes,
that he's aware of the whole shenanigans around him, and
right.
he's struggling to decide how to act, knowing that he has to act in this play. And I think that's what we all struggle with. Like, in our
Yes,
true selves, we have a play around us of
right.
bad guys and good guys and helpers and friends and
So
lovers.
what? So why does that play feel like so much work?
And that's just
It's the
journey
idea
of the
that
self.
I've so over relied on my thinking rather than it's as though I'm in the cockpit of an airplane and I'm arguing with the dashboard because I have no idea how to fly. And I think nothing's wrong because I haven't crashed, but I sense something's going to go seriously wrong shortly. And to be dysfunctional on this basic element, if the basic ideas I have about reality are that I create it, then everything I'm doing within that seeming reality is corrupt and toxic. And I think because it's so insane, the point of insanity is that you don't think you're insane. If somebody thinks they're insane, that's sane. It wouldn't be insane to think you're insane. If you think you're insane, you're saying, at least if you walk into a mental institution and say, I'm insane, they say, well, not enough to come in here. The people
That's
we're
so
working with
true.
are the ones that come in and say, I'm not insane. That's the whole point.
I think I recently told I've been in and out of the hospital. I had sepsis, and I was like fighting for my life,
Right.
and and I'm still like, very fragile, and I'm taking antibiotics and the whole rigmarole, and it's like hell in my physical body. It's just, there's vomiting, it's very just, you know, but it's a relief, it's a relief to be like, yeah, my physical body is struggling right now, and I have to take it easy, and I have to, but it's like if I want to go and run a marathon and just like deny the fact, or if I want to, and there's a, and being in the hospital was a psychic toll as well, the MRIs and the testing and all the, I don't know if you've ever been in the hospital, to your listeners, but there's a lot of noises, and it's kind of like you're on a spaceship, and there's and lights going on and off, and it's just a challenging for your psyche. And I think one of the blessings that I've been given is to be like, okay, well, I just went through a very um physically challenging experience, and to recognize that my body is doing much better, and it's getting better, but it's going to take a little time. And once I acknowledge that, it like really takes a lot of the pressure off of like just trying to manage and trying to make everything, make something what it isn't. Like that definition of insanity, right? Is like what is it? Doing the same thing, but expecting different results. So it's like, if, if I had been continuing my life in times as before the hospital, as I was doing it now, that would be insanity. There has to be adjustments that are being made.
So here's the mental obsession insanity: doing the same thing, knowing the result, and continuing to think it won't be the result.
Yes, that
That's
is.
that's now getting to the point where it's complete delusion, it's complete narcissism, it's a complete seemingly self-absorbed state where all I am is in my thoughts, and I'm stuck in those thoughts because they have me now. I don't have them anymore. I don't have thoughts now, they have me. And what am I defined by? The limits of those thoughts. So, what am I constantly struggling with? Trying to expand those thoughts while they have no basis in anything other than what I think about them. So, I'm constantly in an internal struggle with the self I think I am that I'm not. And once again, wondering how to fix myself. The self help industry today is $10 billion. Trying to fix a
Wow.
trying to fix a self, roughly, trying to fix a self that is illusory. It's complete make-believe fantasy as reality. It will never be real. It will never be true, but is certainly within the realm of an absolute knowing nature. We've been given the freedom to go as far as to make believe that we are nothing more than what we think and end up living a hellish experience. My sense is hell isn't under earth. It's the earth we're standing on in terms of our own thinking. It's the experience we're creating in our own mentality. God isn't in heaven so that we got to get there somehow. We got to get a spaceship and get there. We have to kill ourselves to get there, right? And the self we're killing is just the body we have. That doesn't resolve the problem because the essence of it is still the same.
It's so interesting when you say, like, I get this instant, like, while we're here, like, I don't know about heaven. In Hamlet says to Horatio, there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in our philosophy. And that might be true. And I've had some interesting experiences with the beyond and everything like that. But I will say that, like, while I'm here, how do I create heaven today? What can I do today that, like, spreads this, like, because there is joy. There is an artesian well of joy that we can tap
Yes.
into, and it never goes out.
Well, we can't tap out of it. See, the interesting thing is to think that all I am is had by thoughts is to deny that all I am is had by reality. I'm already had by reality. It's not an option. Here's the
No.
difference between addiction and thinking and reality. I don't have a choice. I don't have a choice to opt in or out of reality. If I kill my body, it doesn't kill the essence of spirit.
No, it doesn't. It
So
doesn't.
I don't tap out and I don't tap into that. And yet I can't be condemned by something that has given me everything. How can you
Oh,
be condemned by it?
that's,
There's no contempt in it.
I can't be condemned by something that has given me everything. I think that's
That's
beautiful.
what love
And
is.
yeah,
It's really what love is in its essence. It's an unbounded, unforgettable, meaning it's a knowing awareness that's always present. So there is no unforgiveness in it. There is
no.
no you've sinned and you have to correct yourself or you're going to be smeared and burn in hell and all that because God is upset. These gods we have largely made really are the culmination, like literary characters, of all the personalities of everyone who's ugly on earth.
I
They're
yeah.
created as humans. They're reflections of humans, not an infinite spirit, not something that is absolutely giving everything all the time in nothing held back, nothing. If that's the case and I'm thinking about it improperly, I'm not channeling God. I'm not expressing reality. I'm expressing these diversions of reality, these perversions. They're all different versions I'm coming up with to look like I'm creating reality.
I
I'm
think it's
not. I'm
no.
manifesting effects that are depressing,
There's
that are
this
miserable.
miserable. I was listening to a talk the other day about Michael Singer was the guy, and he was talking about how, like, the universe is that the universe is there, but we're part of the universe, and the universe
Yes,
kind of is happening. It's
yes.
happening, and we don't really affect it that much. We our brains are thinking, oh, I have to I have to do something and be something. But, like, really, we are just part of this event, and the universe is in us too, and we think we have a lot to do with ourselves, but it's really just happening. We don't really have to do much at
You
all.
don't you don't have to do anything. It's already happening. And I would suggest that the present, my sense is the present isn't in time or space.
No.
Because to divide time would not suggest an indivisible presence. It would suggest a division of limits. And you were just talking about how do I get beyond these limits, is to realize there are no limits other than the limits I maintain. Now, if I'm the maintainer of the limits and also crying out to get beyond them, if I look at that honestly, that would be insane to make believe I'm being tortured by anything other. I become the thesis and the antithesis simultaneously. I'm pro and con simultaneously,
Right.
wondering why I feel stuck.
Right.
Now, the pro
Right.
and con are part of this experience we're having. They're there, but they aren't separated by anything other than the thoughts I have and the positions I take. And when I think my position is right and real, I think all other positions are not, and I become threatened. My life seems to be threatened because other people take other positions rather than see, in the principled sense, when I take a position and I can take that position freely, so too can everyone else take the position they're taking without any threat to me whatsoever. All it is a thought. So when you talk about trying to get beyond the thought, you're thinking you're in the thought to think you need to get beyond the thought, when in fact it's just a thought you're in that's limiting your ideas about what's beyond. It isn't beyond, it's here. Metaphysical, beyond the physical, isn't beyond it, it's within it and without it simultaneously.
And what
It's
is
a
this idea of transcendence?
Well, again, we think in physical terms because we think of everything in terms of our physical body. And our brain is actually an analyzer of physicality. That's what it's analyzing for the most part. But it also knows, without any doubt, because it wouldn't be thinking if it didn't, an absolute reality. It knows reality, which is exactly why most people, when they go wrong, don't feel right. That would indicate to me that we know what's right, which is why we know what's wrong. So when we think we don't know, the wrong we're feeling is the awareness that we know better. And to
There's
think I don't know that is to miss the absolute perspective that I'm being offered my human body, because it's beautifully designed based on rightness, based on truth, based on reality, to give me guidance to not just survive, but thrive, to have abundance rather than just scarcity. That scarcity that I think I live in, that fearful
yes,
state, is
yes,
literally an imposed, induced concept. That's a dream. It's a nightmare. It's a movie in my
nightmare.
brain. And I think if the movie ends, I die. And yet I've seen hundreds of movies and none of the cast died for the most part. Some did. Vic Morrow did, and some other people along the way were killed during movie shoots. But for the most part, the cast survives the end of the movie. I may
Um,
be sad for the events. I may be affected by the horror films I see, but that's a good indication that the mentality I create and my own ability to imagine things can also cause my body to feel those things. And that doesn't confirm reality, it confirms my ability to create effects.
there's we were talking, I think, last time about Bruce Lee, right? And
Yeah,
Enter the Dragon. And here's somebody who was so in control of his body, not in control, but he trained his body so much so that he went against the limits of what you can think of as what a physical body can do. And
right.
he wrote a book all about it too. And the book is kind of a mix between martial arts theory and Zen theory. And it's so wonderful. And I think it's so wonderful and it's so liberating. And it's one of the things he talks about is like this limitless field. And when you tap into that energy of the limitless field, when you're not, I have to make 10, I have to do this 10 times, or I have to like run for 10 minutes. But when you just go and you just are present with the body, with movement, and it's not about stopping the movement, it's about being free, being completely free to move, to act, to think, or not. I think it's more not thinking, actually, that when you're in that zone. And I think that zone can be applied to everybody. I think that, you call it flow. People call it flow. It's kind of what we're doing right now. It's
Yeah,
it's being present with whatever is coming up in this moment. And I think, when we're in touch with the actual soul and the artesian well of joy and limitless possibilities, then there is flow in your lot in one's life. Then there is the possibility of being really truly just alive in this.
here.
Yeah, here alive.
Okay, so let's say from a principled standpoint, let's be preposterous and absurd in our consideration. And let's just say that we're always in that state you just described, always.
Yes, yes.
And what would it be to think we're not?
Wrong.
Yes. And delusional,
A delusion,
delusional, because we
mistake.
really believe we are not there to be telling the stories we do about trying to get there and tap in or tap out. The interesting thing about the martial arts is they're really helping people understand that they've always had the limitless ability in their body. But it isn't until they have proof. Think of this: reality doesn't need proof. Truth doesn't need proof because it doesn't fight. God isn't pissed off because somebody thinks God's not true. We create that because that's how we feel about other people that don't think like we do. That becomes God. So we've over magnetized God as becoming this human. We've dispirited human experience by humanizing God. So if the nature of our nature is natural, it must be our nature. Trees don't seem to be arguing over what they do. The air doesn't seem to be in a fight. It when the wind blows, it moves. It just goes with it and it interacts. And
Yeah.
this moment right now, regardless of what we think, is absolutely the culmination of everything everywhere, including everything that is nowhere. And if you think of the word nowhere, it's now here.
Oh, that's good. Nowhere is now and here. I like that
So
very much.
if it's here and we talk about it in those terms, my sense is that where I gain faith is where I prove things. And I think I'm proving reality when in fact all I'm doing is finally expressing it because I've allowed the limits to expand a little bit. And if I'm always expanding my limits, I'm always maintaining those limits. And to begin to think in terms, you've heard of people who, there was a grandmother once who had the grandkid under a car, and she picked the car up and pulled him out. She didn't think about it. She
No,
just had this seeming superhuman, supernatural, we call it. It's not.
it's
It's
there.
just that we've been so depreciated in our appreciation for reality and truth in an absolute sense that we've been dysfunctioning at a level where we call it functioning, and we've been immoral and call it morality because we've been deceptive about it. We think we need to prove it first and then do it. And my experience, Herb Kay says in his workshop, I don't know if you know Herb, but he has a workshop about this spirituality for everyone. He says ego needs proof before action. Spirit is needs no proof, and you're in action. The
Oh, that's
idea
good.
is like we were talking about the other day. Inspiration doesn't have me thinking about where to go. It has me acting in ways that I say, "How did I get here? I didn't even know. I didn't even notice. I'm saying things that don't necessarily process. Now, my brain, when you said that he may not be thinking to do those things, to make a body work, you've got to be thinking because there's trillions of chemical combinations going on to simply have a step taken in our body, to take
Mhm.
a step forward, to raise a hand, to do this. There's all kinds of stuff going on. It's all being monitored by a brain. People in comas don't run marathons. People in anesthesia don't tend to worry about things. So it's actually allowing thinking to begin to channel and express the light. And the culmination of all colors, which we define, by the way, not ironically or coincidentally, as emotions, like a prism, we have the full range of emotions to choose from, and we manipulate our experience by how much cloud cover we maintain to have certain colors show up and others not. But the totality of all colors, guess what it is?
Black. Nope.
White.
White. Oh, it's white. Huh.
Yeah. And you know what the absence of light is? Pitch black.
Pitch black.
It's real black. It's no sense of light whatsoever, no sense of space, no sense of distance, nothing. And those are metaphoric examples of how the universe is revealing to us its nature, which is natural and it isn't somewhere else. And we're absolutely a part of it. So we cannot be apart from it. We cannot be lonely in this universe at all, ever,
I think that's so important to say that we
ever.
cannot be lonely. We are part of this universe. And so many, I mean, I probably people listening here, there's this loneliness epidemic that's going on in America, especially in Japan right now with I think we talked about the hikikomori, it's called. And it's basically people who just don't leave the apartment anymore and they live in the digital world and feel very isolated, alienated from the world around them. And what you just said, I think is so important that, if we can really change our perspective about who we actually are, not who we like have been trained to think we are, but who
Well,
we
but
actually
we're
are.
already changing our perspective by thinking it's what we think. We're already doing it. When we begin to concede, like you said earlier, how do I sit with it? When I sit with it, when I begin to embrace it, when you begin to have the doubt, begin to see it, you'll start noticing you're creating it in your thinking. And you're so obsessed with your thinking as being reality, you think it becomes your reality. And now you have to wonder how to change reality. Well, reality isn't changing. Truth doesn't change. They're absolute states. They do not change. There is no parts or pieces. There's no potential conflict. They're absolute states of pure consciousness.
We talked a little bit about this last time I spoke to you, but this idea also, like we're talking about the grandma who can pick up
Yeah.
a car, our our bodies might be able to live for much longer than we are currently living. We like die at 80 or something, and maybe we have a longer warranty. Can we address
Well,
that?
I would say the spirit isn't ever going to die. The essence of that knowingness is never dying because it isn't the point about you were talking about flow.
Yes.
In our experience, the moment is always new, always new. So if it's always new, it can't get old. So it's not in a time continuum. It's not in a past and future, it's in a present. The past is only what I think of it. So the past only exists in my memory and my thoughts. It isn't somewhere, someplace, doing something. It's here now. The future is only what I make of it now because that becomes the future. The voice I speak becomes the experience I have because I'm basing my movement in that direction. But the newness of that flow is always new. It never gets old. And if it's always new, what does it mean? I'm always capable of choosing now freely anything I want. And what does that mean? I want what I'm choosing now. Now, if I'm choosing sick thoughts, why would I want those if I wasn't basing the premise of those thoughts on other sick thoughts? And wouldn't that eventually track back to one single thought that my thoughts are real rather than imagined, rather than just a potential for a project, a narrative in my brain that I can make up? And if we look accurately at what we're doing and witness the imagery that we attach and the words that we attach. Our words are expressions of our thinking. Our feelings are expressions of our thoughts. They're all bodily functions. We always seem to hear God in whatever domestic language we speak. It isn't curious that God happens to speak all these languages. God doesn't speak a language at all. God is a knowing nature that we know, and when we're converting it, we tend to convert it in a language I don't tend to convert it in German and French. It's always English. So when I'm waiting to listen to God, I'm actually waiting for what I call my ego to finally surrender to me when I'm the one creating the idea that it exists, and it can't surrender because I'm obsessively maintaining the idea that it's real.
This idea of meditation, and that, like, we need to meditate like 20 minutes a day in order to find peace, as opposed to having our lives be filled with the concept of meditation, which is to be able to take space I think the purpose of meditation is to take space from the thoughts and see that they're happening without any direct involvement from the practitioner. I think it's really important to find out how we can be in that state um, throughout the entire experience, the
Well,
entire journey.
we're in that state 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, thinking we're not. And getting back to the question earlier is why would I think I'm not in that state? I'm trying to prove my thoughts are real. So when I work with people and they say, well, I know that I'm not my body and I know I'm not my thoughts. And I said, well, then look at your actions. Why do you come to me depressed? Why do you come to me feeling alienated? We're feeling our thoughts because feelings are byproducts of the cause of thought. If I'm looking at the effects I'm suffering, I'm recognizing they're being caused by the thought I'm having. And if the basis of my thought is thinking it's reality, everything I'm thinking is going to have a causality of loneliness because it's based on a thoughtless idea. The loneliness is that there's no substance, there's no denominator. It's a zero. What was a denominator in math? It's a zero. It's nothing. This isn't something small. It isn't less than. It isn't low self-esteem. It's no esteem, no value. It's no self whatsoever. It's not low self-esteem. It's no self, period. It's all an illusion. This has
Yeah.
been a major dysfunction historically within the context of people who have thought, because they thought they were in charge, that they should dominate whole swaths of people with their philosophy and theory and kill everyone amongst that group that doesn't agree with them. We've been doing it historically over and over again.
We're
No
doing
other
it now.
species, the only thing other species do to other animals within their species is eat them. They don't sit around one at a time. They don't sit around and say, how do I wipe out half of the population here to alleviate the threat? They would be alleviating their food source.
Oh gosh, I love looking at like lions lying in the sun. And if the gazelles, after, the gazelles are not in any danger once the lion has been fed. They can like coexist pretty well.
Right.
The lion is fine. They're just like digesting and going, there's gazelles over there. I'll get them later when it's fine. And everything's coexisting quite lovely. We are the only species that things we need to wipe out the others, things we need that there's a problem. We need to get rid of certain people. We need to control other people. Other people are more, these are all the lies that make the society and the civilization what we're living very sick.
Well,
I mean, one of the things I say, like, I'm a dropout because it's just it's a concept of saying that I'm not going to participate in the insanity, which we keep, which continues to be manifesting because we're believing our thoughts and we're collectively acting on this insanity.
Yes. So to any degree I do that, I am infecting the entire grid of everyone who is doing that right now.
I think we should say more about this, the idea of this grid, and that how we can influence it, and how we can influence it by having this conversation, people listening to this conversation.
We're doing it right now. For you to think of it as so difficult to deal with, right? Think about how impossible it seems. That impossibility is actually awareness of the impossible. Think of Alice in Wonderland, right? What did Lewis Carroll talk about? And I don't even remember when he wrote that, but it had to be well over 100 years ago.
100, yeah, it was over 100. It was 1910 or something.
Okay, so he's talking about the looking glass. What do we look through? So Alice was seeing things according to how she thought of them, not according to how they were. So if things are as they are right now, and everything is exactly as it is right now, because in this infinitesimal, literally infinitesimal moment, it doesn't even have a beginning and end because there's no space in it. There's nothing. It's infinitesimal. If everything is absolutely doing what it's doing right now, and I think it shouldn't be doing what it's doing, and I see it as something that shouldn't be happening, that's a pretty major conflict with what's happening. I am putting myself in the front, not of a train, but every train of thought. And I'm wondering why I feel like I can't get off the tracks.
How do we like come home to ourselves on a regular basis? We're already home, right?
Yes,
We're already
yes,
there. We're
yes.
It's just a simple realization, a simple awareness of where we truly are.
Exactly. And that we are.
And that we are.
Now think of the difference between that we are and who we are. Who we are just begs another question. We've been asking questions for centuries and avoiding the facts. That we are has never been in question, and there is no doubt. We couldn't even think. Heidegger said, you can't think about existence if you don't exist.
I love some Heidegger. I love some Heidegger. And about
that's where I stopped reading that's the point at which I stopped reading the book, because I thought he's just going to go on and explain this in 700 other different ways, and I get it.
Yeah. Yes.
But the essence of certainty is certainty. And the essence is beginning to say, it isn't what's happening out there, it's what's happening here to begin with. It's what I'm doing with what I'm thinking about what's out there. And if I'm seeing it this way, that's what I'm doing right now. If I'm seeing the world as an impossible place, I am creating the impossibility to see it that way. My looking glass, my understanding, think of thinking as a process, and understanding is an attempt to see what we cannot see with visibility.
Mm,
because it's understanding. Now think now of substance beneath our feet.
I like that. I like that a lot, Jack. Substance. It's been, yeah.
And guess what humility is in its essence?
What?
Common as dirt.
Common as dirt.
What's the earth made of? Dirt for the most
Dirt.
part. Now it has different forms. There's magma in the middle where it's so hot that it's melted stone and rock and all that. It's the essence of it. It's like lava. So if I'm able to see what's beneath my feet, I'm starting to reckon with the fact that gravity has always grounded me naturally, that the earth is floating in the middle of space, constantly in motion, never in the same place at the same time, ever,
Ever.
ever, always new. And it's not tethered by anything visible. And yet we're relying on it right now without any doubt. We're not even questioning it because it's so obvious that we allow that oblivion in place because principles don't require me to think about them to be principled. The nature of nature doesn't require me to think about it. But when I think about it is only what I think, now I've taken it on as though it isn't what it is. And I'm not where it is, and I need to get there. And why can't I get there? Because I'm always in the only place I can ever be, which is here now. There's no
Beautiful.
getting. There's no
Getting.
the getting is forgetting that forgiving is giving things what they are as they are, letting them be.
I just love the phrase that we are. I just think that's so simple. And
Yeah.
and it's such a something to just it's a slight shift, but it's a subtle shift, but it's kind of a huge shift because
Well,
it makes me feel just joy. Like that
there's no doubt or question in it at all.
there's no doubt or question in it.
Yeah,
How we
exactly.
are, and
Exactly.
there's all these other words, existence and alive, and but there's the question of life or death is kind of like, let's just push that. That might be a little bit too much. I like the idea of understanding, under,
Yeah.
like
And
get under all the concepts for a moment. One of the things, I mean, I'm very a visual person. I love looking at nature and the shapes and
right.
there's also like in math, imaginary numbers, right? And if you look at the grid, like there's certain, like I think it's 1/y negative. I don't know exactly what it is, but there's a graph where it comes very close to zero. I think it's imaginary numbers. It could be irrational numbers. It never hits zero.
Right.
It's like manifestation. There's this
It's the idea that if what we're trying to do is divide one in half forever and think we'll get to nothing,
yeah,
think we'll be free. And what
yeah,
happens is the fractions, which are what's interesting too about the way we identify fractions that go on forever, like
yes,
pi.
yes.
We even openly identify numbers that go on forever as irrational numbers. Think about that. We see it as irrational in math, but we think of forever as our future. It's dismissing the present as an absolute state of being that we cannot avoid, we cannot distract ourselves from, but we can think we avoid it and think we distract ourselves from, which puts the problem of our mentality solely squarely in how we're utilizing or misutilizing our thoughts. That's it.
Yeah,
Very simple. All of
yeah.
it. Now, if you're thinking in principle terms, you can see all of anxiety and stress, which, by the way, when you're talking about recuperating,
Mhm.
resting, what's interesting about rest, if you think about it, is it doesn't mean doing anything. And what does
No.
the body do? Heal. So, what do we have the body doing when we're at unrest and think we're constantly in motion, impelled and compelled by impulsive behaviors? What are we doing? We're wearing the sucker out.
Yeah,
We're
yeah,
literally wearing it out and thinking we're hiding it inside. We're not hiding it. The blood, sweat, and tears are all evidence of it. There's nothing hidden in the universe, nothing. There's no mystery. The mystery is what we think about it as reality.
I never even thought about heal as like a
About
word,
what?
about the idea of like the word heal and like the word like
Heal.
heal, like just
Yeah,
like
exactly. Like a
bro.
dog. Stop.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, just like rest, heal. In music, the idea of, the rest stop is so important for the rest of
Right.
the music. You have to rest.
Well, and it's like seeing silence and stillness as the basis of that knowing nature. Now think of something that never changes. Its silence provides the potential for sound.
Yes,
Darkness provides the potential for all
potential
the
for
light
light.
to even be distinguished. If we had nothing but pure white light, we would not function well in this universe because we would be blinded by the light. Literally,
Mm,
we wouldn't see anything other than that. We would have
yeah,
no sense of depth, no
no.
sense of any articulation whatsoever. And interestingly, light traveling through space does not light that space up unless there is something in that space. So light only affects things that exist within vacant space. Who would
Oh,
that
wow,
be
I love
on
that.
Earth? Us,
Us.
things. So it's not just that we are, it's that all things are too. All that are and all that is. It's every speck of sand. Like I said the other day when I was standing on the beach, I said, there's trillions of grains of sand, and each one of them has a subatomic structure to allow it to even look like matter and act like matter. And it doesn't argue. There's no fight in that at all. There's just a constant interaction. We have conditioned ourselves to believing that interreaction with each other is natural, common, fighting, distrusting, devaluing,
Yes.
spiting, condemning, all that stuff. That's all coming out of thought. That isn't reality.
Mm. The questions that we have, the questions that we have for each other, the constant like gripes and the constant like um the endless question. I guess the thing that when we talk about math, we talk about endless fractions. There's also endless questioning. You can question and doubt forever. It never goes
We've
away.
been doing it. Everybody talks about seeking, and nobody's saying, why are we still seeking? We clearly are asking the wrong questions. We are asking questionable questions, trying to think that the answer is going to be rational within our brain, and then we'll understand truth, and then we'll understand reality. Think of the difference in a scientist thinking that process of elimination is their only potential. So they've got trillions of options and they're going to narrow it down to the one right thing rather than come from, they're already the thing. We're already observing. Einstein said that when we look at thing, it changes the thing. My sense is because we're not looking at the thing, we're impacting it with what we think of it.
Mm.
And it's transforming literally matter, which is what we are capable of doing. We're able to transform reality. We're not able to create reality because the law of energy, law of conservation, I think it is, says there's no more or less energy in the universe at any given time. It's just transmuting, transferring, transforming constantly. That's what our manifestation of thoughts do. It doesn't create reality, it just creates a new version, an impact, a manifestation of something that alters existing reality.
The question that I have is can we evolve as a culture? Evolution is I think evolution is quite slow as a civilization in terms of like us kind of collectively understanding that we can be here, that we are here, and that they kind of the whole play, going back to Hamlet, the whole play, the whole something smells rotten in Denmark, so to speak, can be,
Can still smell here.
yeah, yeah.
Well, I would suggest that time is basically a function of denial.
Yes.
And that even in our own experience, whenever you like writing, I sat with Herb K yesterday and had lunch with him, and I said to him, because he writes a lot and he spends a lot of time refining things, and he'll work on a page of writing for 6 months, and he says, I know it's done when I can read it and not change it. I said, that's when I let it go and give it to somebody. Till then,
Yeah.
I just float and come back to it and keep refining it. And I said, isn't it interesting when words are interesting because they're really products of the brain. Humans have a unique ability to converse. And think of the word converse. It's verse.
Yes.
It's a verse. And universe, one single verse, one song
Single
for all
song,
of us.
one single song, one single. I love that. I
So
love that.
when you're writing, which I know you enjoy doing, think of how 2 and 3 hours will just evaporate.
I know. Yeah.
So think of time now in terms of denial. If I'm creating matter that seems to matter so much that really doesn't matter, time takes for think of pain. When you're in real pain, time doesn't fly by, seems to stand still. Interesting that time would slow down at the point we're trying to have fun all the time. Time flies when you're having fun. But the difference between inspired expression and time, the experience of it is dramatic.
Yeah.
Another little point. Light speed is always traveling at the speed of light. It doesn't build up. It doesn't start at zero and end up at 186,000 miles a second. It just is always there. That's an absolute state we're witnessing, and yet not quite interested in talking about absolute states as a function of our actual existence. We're witnessing it. We know it scientifically.
When
And
I'm
what else is interesting is when at light speed, there's no time.
yeah. No, it's when I write, I it's a drop out of time. And I think one of the things, what because I'm in touch with this limitlessness. I can bring my mentor is Harold Bloom, who wrote Shakespeare, The Invention of the Human, right? The idea that Shakespeare like helped us to become conscious more conscious of ourselves as human personalities. And I want to talk about Harold, right? Harold died several years ago, but his wisdom and the wisdom that he channeled is available to me, right? In the present moment, right now.
Yes, it's all he
And
was talking about. It's all Shakespeare talked about. Why Shakespeare's so valued is because he bothered to be accurate about what was happening. He didn't actually create society. He mentioned that we were depreciating society by not recognizing that we're all part of society and we're all contributing members of society, which is why people from the royal families that thought they were exclusive from society dressed down to attend his events to find some humor in what they realized seemed so seriously dreadful.
well, one of the beautiful things like that Shakespeare refined was the idea of the soliloquy. And if there's anything that kind of subtly says you are not alone to the
Yeah,
audience, soliloquy, because he's inviting the audience into this idea like, what I'm going to say. I'm going to say to be
right.
or not to be. And that is the question. And you know it. You know that's the question. And then he just says it right there. And it's like, wow, thank you. Thanks for saying that. Thanks for sharing that with me.
And what is it? Whether it's nobler to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous
outrageous
misfortune,
fortune,
that would be an
or to take
inducement.
arms against a sea of troubles and by
Yeah.
opposing end them.
Yes. See, that's the fault. That's the thinking that thinking is the source rather than a source that's indefinable that ends up being the knowingness that we already have that we make believe we don't. So the difference between obsessive thinking and actually acting in accordance with our nature, that's always our nature, is inspiration versus desperation.
Oh, now that's nice. Inspiration versus desperation.
So think of the weight that desperation must carry to give itself seeming significance that it doesn't otherwise have. We're creating it in the idea that there's something to oppose within our thought simply because we imagine there's something to oppose. So when you talk about how do we deal with this, and notice how we're dealing with it presently to be causing the effects that we're witnessing, not just in my body, but in all bodies and all things, you start seeing that there's some very distressing things to look at, but the potential for the disillusion of those things is as simple as my thought saying, this is just a thought, no more. It's just imagined. It isn't reality, and it isn't anyone else's reality. And now I'm in a position where I can talk and speak in terms that may be useful to others to see that they don't have to get over themselves or transcend themselves or fix themselves because there's no self to fix that isn't already in absolute perfect order for all of us. The knowingness, I was describing the knowingness of that sense, that knowingness doesn't change. So, what could be simpler? And as a result, what could be easier to complicate by not noticing that essence? Like, and we talked about calculus the other day, right? The whole
Yeah.
invention of calculus was trying to sort out that curvature that you're talking about that never gets to zero. But the changes in that curvature are infinitesimal ultimately. They realized that it wasn't the X and Y coordinate, that between that, I mean, the interesting thing about this ultimately is that they proved that you can't make a point in mathematics. So it also means that the points we think are so important are just made up. They don't really exist. Because
They
if you
don't.
could make a point, it would cover, if it has any space at all, that means that the space between the space it has would be covering other points, which would mean two things are occupying the same space at the same time, which they are saying is impossible. So
It
the
is.
point is there's no point.
No
Now,
point.
I can make the points and I can feel the imposition of those points. And if I think they're real, I start becoming depressed by that imposition in time.
And then we're participating in the illusion.
Yes.
And we
Yes.
become
Now, and there's nothing wrong with that because it's actually an innovative quality that we have to imagine things well beyond our experience as being possible. Why? Because everything's possible. Everything's possible that's possible. And one of the possibilities is to think that impossibility is also possible. That's the freedom we've been given. Some people say, why would God let that happen? Because God gave us the freedom to do what we want with what we have and to also see that we're doing what we want with what we have right now, right now, as it is, as we are, as things are now, always,
oh,
always.
always, always.
And if I
That's
think in those
important.
terms,
It's
I
always,
start looking at it and
that
saying,
way.
why would I want this? That's crazy. And start to laugh at the absurdity, just like Shakespeare. Take something very, very heavy and serious and turn it into complete laughter because when you pop the bubble, you realize it's only been a bubble thought to be real. You'd never been in it. You just thought you were to prove that you were separate and alone and that the misery you were maintaining was worth it and you had to figure it out and everybody else is against me and the world is fucked up and the whole thing.
I I love I think there's so much value in just being able to get out of the delusion and the dream but the flexibility that you can participate. How are you participating? You can choose how you want to participate.
You're choosing it right
You
now.
always are choosing it. You are
Yes.
always choosing it. You're
Yes.
always choosing it.
Nothing happens. You know, I think something that's been missed historically is that thinking is an action that precedes all voluntary physical actions, all of them. We never raise our arm without thinking. And if it's a spasm or something, that obviously doesn't include thinking. So that wouldn't be one of those things. But most of us are not spastic constantly. We're not
No.
constantly just having reflexes that jerk out of us. But within the mentally obsessive thinking, it seems like that's exactly what we're doing. We're just
Yeah.
being jerked along. So we call people jerks. So it isn't a coincidence, it's a coincidence with what's happening. It isn't an accident. We use that to disclaim responsibility.
Mm,
Irresponsibility isn't a function of nature, it's a function of dysfunctional thinking.
oh,
Immorality isn't a function of nature, it's a function of dysfunctional thinking. Lies are not sourced in nature, they only happen in brains. If they're only happening in our brains and we're struggling with our mentality and start noticing that we're the ones perpetuating the mythology and the superstition on that global basis to be thinking so clearly about everyone else and living in an absolute state of doubt, it might be worth noticing we're thinking things that are doubtful. It's that clear and that simple.
how do we like, because as I talk to you, I feel like I feel mind, right? Capital
Yes, yes,
feel mind.
yes.
And how do we continue, like, how do we continue to stay with mind?
The reason I do this, I worked with people individually for a long time. And I noticed that some people originally when I had this were very upset about this conversation. And I've had people on this pod, you can listen through some of the things. I realized that if people are telling their stories, which are immoral, when I grew up, people used to say the moral of the story is this. You don't hear that anymore.
Mm.
You don't hear that. What you hear are stories to justify why I shouldn't be where I am with what I have. And that I'm not these things I do, which is true,
Right.
but I seem to be defined by those things I do. So it's complete mythology, complete superstition in our own experience. But what I noticed was that that reactivity was identifying the thinking. And I noticed that they wouldn't be struggling with that if they didn't know better. So I began to witness it differently and say, oh, and the idea that if I'm doing it and other people are doing it, I started seeing what they're doing is I started seeing it as something that I could have compassion for because I naturally did, because I knew how quickly I can do that same thing. I didn't see it as something I was above and beyond. I saw it as something
Right.
that I'm perfectly capable of doing. When I see that all possibility is possible and the possibility of thinking impossible is possible, I know every moment contains that kernel of possibility. So the question is, how am I going to choose responsibly and freely? Since I'm free, my sense is the triangle of mental obsession or thinking properly is choice, responsibility, and freedom. And freedom always comes with responsibility. And responsibility is the ability to respond, to consider my thoughts before I act. Obsessive thinking is absolutely automated reaction, defensiveness, denial, immediately defense, denial, defy, delude, lie, misrepresent, try to over influence, try to keep people away because I think if they ever saw what I was thinking, they would think nothing of me because there is actually nothing to think of. And I know it, or I wouldn't be shy about exposing it and expressing it and participating. I know it.
Yeah.
So that thing you just described, I've spoken to people in groups, and very often someone will say, I feel what you're saying is right, but I don't seem to understand it. And I say, well, you are identifying your absolute knowing nature in relation to the thinking you're doing.
Yeah.
So that
And
knowing
that's a
nature
lot of
doesn't
people are doing that. That's kind of the whole. I can do that too. I like what you said, I think compassion is so important. Is so important because that way it's not alien when someone comes to me and starts telling me that they can't go on, that this life is dark and and then, and to be able to say what you're thinking right now is
think
not
think
you.
of think of those words that they're using though. I can't go on. You know why? You can't think 24 hours about a lie. You know that your thinking is susceptible to not continuing. So you know that you can't go on. It's the thinking we're doing about life we're struggling with, not life. Those thoughts become so intoxicating and so consuming, we really believe we're in them, we're stuck in them, that they are happening to us, and we can do nothing about them. So we continue to do the same thing. And that is a suicidal death wish.
Yeah.
Literally, in the present moment, thinking about not existing because I'm saying I'm irresponsible. If responsibility is an absolute state, I cannot be irresponsible, but I can think and act irresponsibly. Those become behaviors and choices rather than conditions of an absolute essence that I am. That doesn't change. My essence, you're defining it. You just said it. I know that I'm here. You had that sense of presence. You have that sense of presence because we're actually talking about it. We're not talking about the New York Times and all of the issues that are being driven to increase readership, to fuel the anxiety, say, of course I feel these ways. Look at all these horrible things. And you know what does happen when you become clear and look? You'll start seeing things that you haven't even noticed are very upsetting and
Mm.
very sickening and very depressing. But you'll see them as something you can affect in a way that would eliminate them because you've already seen that it becomes laughable to imagine that's reality and truth rather than simply an imposition of thinking that's very weighted and heavy with the idea that it is true and real. It isn't. It never has been. So
Never
that's the
has.
laughability. You asked about that. And that's Shakespeare did that. That's why the royal families used to come hidden in paupers' clothes to the audience because they didn't want to be found out per se or
Sure.
or or hung by the masses for doing what they did, but they also knew within that realm that they thought was divine something was seriously wrong.
Yeah.
They knew in their own experience that even being singled out and in that class that would have been thought to be the one you want to be a part of, something was seriously wrong because it was a heartfelt, a sense felt experience of that wrong, not something I need more and because I have more, I'm better and I'm better than they are. Think of how we feel the idea of there, but for the grace of God go I.
Sure.
Think of how sick it is that we think we're better off because other people are worse off. That is sickening to think. I have to wait for something to, somebody, well, the plane crash. Oh, I'm so glad I missed the plane. God saved me. Well, that
Right,
means God killed all those other people. That's interesting.
right, right,
But the fact
right.
is, humans do things that are not always functional. And even nature does things that can cause death. It's natural. The
It's
idea that we
natural.
should postpone death is the idea that we're imbuing it, not seeing that this storyline, this arc, the beginning, middle, and end, is a story. It's a narrative about one body's experience of life. That's it. It's designed to disintegrate at the point that it reintegrates to the essence of what it came from, which are all the molecules and all the stuff that are out there. But spirit, if it isn't part of that physical realm, doesn't die.
No, no,
It's just an absolute state of awareness.
I think there's so much relief from anxiety if I for me being in mind, being in spirit, um and then like death, the idea of death becomes
Silly.
yes. Yes, it really does.
It
It
is.
really does.
How
And it
what is any more than imposing an idea of who I think I am, this imposter, and
right.
not noticing it's a joke to
It's
take
a
it
joke.
seriously.
It's
It's
a
a joke.
joke.
You were asking earlier, how do you take it? How do you laugh? Well, you see that it isn't serious to begin with, that the seriousness that you've been giving it is the attempt to deny and defy reality by making believe it is real. It is true. That's why
One
the person who the joke is on never laughs because they take it personally, because they think the person they are is the thinking they do, rather than laugh with everyone because of the absurdity of the thing that includes everyone, not just them. They're not separate from them. These are just personalities that we created, characteristics. They are literally roles we assume in a play.
roles we yeah, and that's the gift of Shakespeare, this idea like I'm going to play this role, Hamlet's going to play a role, I'm going to play
Yeah.
this madcap. My favorite play is Waiting for Godot, and in several times throughout the play they say I can't go on.
Right.
And they silence. Oh, like let's wait. What did they say? They said their whole play is waiting for something that never comes. He never
Well, the
comes.
funny thing is that people keep coming and he keeps standing in the same place and can't get there.
I know.
But
It's
these
so
things have
good.
been talked about in arenas that we think are theatrical. But the theater, if you look at theater, like theater of war, it's the engulfing nature of the ideas we have about what the world is that is theatrical to the idea that we think the imposition of personalities and characteristics is anything other than a choice we make about the roles we want to play.
The roles we want to
And
play.
if I am as I am, and I know that, all of the rest of it is completely changing all the time, anyhow. So nothing I'm doing is permanent. To be offended by anyone is to reveal my own defensiveness in that regard. There is no offense when there is no defense.
There
There
is
is
no
no defense when there is no offense. These are choices we make, positions we take, and think they're the only position we can take because they're our right, they're our way. And we have that right. It doesn't make it right to do it and think of it as reality.
I think that's the idea of defense. The idea of there is no um, defense without offense is
Yeah.
very important. Very important.
So thinking about that quickly, because I know we're coming up against the end of an hour and a half, and that seems to be about the normal run
Okay.
for listeners to tolerate. To begin to see this experience we're having like a teeter totter, if we give weight to one side, it's going to drop down. We're going to feel down by that weight. And to think that life is only about putting more weight on the other side to bring balance to it means that we're constantly maintaining this teeter and the totter, rather than realize that teeter totter has always been sitting on solid ground to be able to teeter and totter. And the solid ground is the substance, the understanding, the thing we can't see yet is there. The
Mm,
thing we don't think we know when we can't see it, but obviously know when we're willing to look.
yeah.
And my sense is you were doing that during our conversation by saying, I get this sense, and that's the actual sense. Now, if we do more of that, the brain is now being introduced to us. I'm introducing my actual self, capital S, the one I share with you and everyone and everything else, not the one that's mine, the one that I only differentiate in the eyes and the senses that I have. But now I realize everybody else is differentiating it too. So I'm doing the same thing in a different way. It doesn't make me different. It makes me the same. If we're all doing it in a different way, that's the same. So again, the opposites aren't opposites when they're seen as the sum total of everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if I'm good, it's because I'm not being bad. And these are all estimations. But without bad, I wouldn't be good. Without up, I wouldn't go down. All those things are manipulations of thought. It's not to say we can't or shouldn't do that. It's to say if that's what we're doing, it's worth noticing that I'm the one causing that. It isn't life, it's what I'm doing with life. It isn't the circumstance, it's what I'm thinking about the circumstance. It isn't them, it's what I think of them. And when I begin to see that, there's a purity of realizing that I've been making stuff up about people that has no basis in any reality, that's typically spiteful and contemptful, because that's what I'm feeling about the world, because that's what I'm doing in my own thinking. My looking glass all of a sudden becomes misunderstanding, and I call it understanding because I am thinking addictively and everything turns around. I think it's actually become true because I would be delusional to maintain a lie if I didn't think it was true. That's the insanity of it. That's the complete insanity of it. It's nuts. And nuts are great in candy and ice cream. But nuttiness isn't that funny when you think it's your reality.
No.
And it isn't. And there are people out there struggling with this who could use an honest conversation. And it doesn't mean I'm having that conversation. I'm just doing what I can to be accurate enough about my experience to see it in a way that may be conducive to listening. I can't have anybody do anything other than what they want. But I can mention to them that they're the ones choosing it, that their choices are the ones that are actually driving that train of thought, that they seem like they're getting run over or at potential risk of being run over because they feel like they're on those tracks.
We said it last time, and I just wanted to mention this, that there is bad thinking, but not bad people.
Yeah. Well, I learned there's a group in Los Angeles called Self Help and Recovery Exchange, and they have all kinds of meetings for all kinds of people, every kind of combination, including ethnic, for Iranians who don't pray the way that Americans pray, and for Asians that don't tend to, for everything, every combination. It's bizarre. But one of the things I learned from a guy there named Jason that basically teaches these protocols of how to deal with people who are struggling, and is he said you can love them, but you don't have to like their behavior.
Mm.
When I started approaching people like on the streets, I live in Venice, there's a lot of homeless, a lot of people that are crazy, literally out of their minds, talking to their seeming self. And by the way, if you ever notice people talking to themselves out loud, they are never saying, I love you, I can't wait to spend more time with you. They are generally screaming bloody murder at something.
Yeah.
Now think of that. Think of this is an imposed state that they think is real, so it continues. And they're talking about it. I watched a guy one morning, this really struck me, talking to himself out loud. And I thought to myself, he's crazy. And then I thought, who's crazy here? He's talking out loud about what he's doing, and I'm thinking about it quietly as though it's true. I am now,
Oh,
I am now,
oh,
he's doing a fifth step, and I'm actually keeping it to my seeming self. And it sort of struck me that the whole thing was it's so contrived, and we've based our
uh,
thinking on treating effects for so long that we haven't bothered to just notice that we've been causing it.
yeah, yeah.
Wow. So this, to me, your outreach, your email, your introduction, when I read it, I knew based on your revelation of here are the interests I have. These are the things I want to do. They were all aimed at helping other people, all of those interests. And I knew that spirit's there. It's getting through. It's like an eggshell, that once it's cracked, the egg's never going back. Right? So we can think those cracks don't matter, but they actually begin to allow that light to seemingly come through. It becomes confirmation to the fact that it's never been anywhere while we've
Yeah.
been thinking because the clouds are out, the sun's not out. The sun's always out. Everything beyond the horizon was always there when people thought the horizon was the end of the world. Everything else was there, the tropical islands, the tea in China, all of it was there waiting. So right now, there is no limit to our reality, shared reality, except the ones we choose, which we're free to make. To think of them as real rather than choices is to think we can't stop doing them. And to live years and years and years doing that, it seems like the only thing we can do because we perpetuated and refined it. The difference is, if that's unnatural, it'll disappear very quickly in the face of actually dealing with nature, because nature becomes so laughably available that you realize truth has never been deep. Only the layers and layers and layers of my own ideas about truth do I think are deep and hidden, because I'm ashamed to expose them. I'm ashamed to admit I have been insane. I have literally been insane in my thinking. I haven't been. I have been thinking insane thoughts.
Mm.
And think of this. I think I mentioned it last week. I have to do something, or I have something to do. Think of the difference in that simple change of language and the idea that it's an absolute necessity I do that. That's an addictive thought. The idea that I have things to do is the idea that I can do anything. And I
Anything.
certainly do not need to
Anything.
repeat the mantra that has become a death wish and wonder why I feel doom and feel so much compassion for people. Suicide's at an all-time rate in every category
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's not an accident. That is a produced result that we've been working on historically. And now with more and more people, it's becoming more obvious because there's less room not to see it. And it seems to be depressing to see that because we're not thinking about it honestly, socially. We're not thinking about it publicly in the actuality of what's happening as an addiction, and seeing that this thing is what Buddha talked about. He talked about clinging thoughts, attachments. Those are all thoughts we think we can't get. What is he saying? It's to addict to desire. What's desire? Want. What's want? Will. What are choices? Will. What are
Well,
self-will? The idea that that's who I am. It isn't who I am. It's simply something I'm doing. I'm making choices. If I know that I'm making them, I can unmake them as quickly or easier than it took to bolster all of the nonsense to make believe that it was true and real to begin with. We're going to do this again.
okay. Let's
All
do
right.
this. Let's definitely do this again, because there's so much more we could talk about. We could just keep going. I see it. We're just like, let's keep going on the
Yeah.
time.
When
Yeah.
we started doing the mental obsession discussions 3 years ago, I didn't set a time limit because I started to see that when people got into the conversation, the time would disappear. And there was one session, and I think it's one of the early ones. You can see it back there, but I think it was 4 or 5 hours. And somebody said, "Do you realize we've been talking for over 4 hours?" And this was a Sunday morning people had set aside at 9 o'clock. It's 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And I said, "Yeah, I'm watching it and I realize it, but do you notice the difference in what happens with time when you're actually talking about stuff that's actually happening?" It starts to become, we're not now intoxicated and consumed by insanity. We're
Right.
actually looking at the adventure and the actual exploration and awe of reality. And
The
if
awe, I
that
love that. That's the awe.
that is so easy to get used to, by the way, that as you begin to watch the narrative you produce and the stories you tell, you'll start saying, that isn't true. What am I doing?
No,
Just because I've
no.
done that 8,000 times doesn't require me to continue. You'll notice the freedom rather than, if I am in a relationship with you where I'm reinforcing my story in hopes that you'll agree and then you reinforce yours, I'm helping you get sick. I'm enabling the worst parts of you to talk in terms that are honest at all. And it doesn't mean, what I learned about honesty is I don't have to be right to be honest. I can share my thoughts as blatantly as I have them because I'm having them. So that would be called transparency. Doesn't mean I have to be right. I have no obligation, except in that when I'm wrong, I think I can only be right. I think I have to be right. I have to fight for right. I have to look right. I have to do all these things to cover it up. There's no righteousness, has no right in it. The whole reason it's righteous is that it's fighting against the wrongness, the
Yeah.
baseness, the thinking is. If thinking is my only source, I am in serious trouble and I know it. And feeling disturbed is a natural consequence of that.
Mm.
So this has been great. I really enjoy this like I did the other day.
I
And
love talking to you, Jack. This is wonderful, and I hope we do it again.
we
You're
will. And something to think about too with your writing. Write down little glimpses of things that occur to you that are laughable to have been taken seriously. Just start noticing. I tell people to watch their words, and initially for 2 months, they think I'm telling them to censor what they say and think.
No, it is watch it.
I said, watch your words because your words are going to reveal what you're thinking. And often they're going to reveal what you don't think you're thinking when you look at them accurately. And that's where you really get in, where the rubber meets the road here. If substance is beneath our feet, then the issue that has been plaguing us is what we call the subconscious. And I realized that's where I left and held every thought I didn't want to expose that would really expose me as a fraud in that darkness of what I claim to be subconscious. But how can we talk about the subconscious as having such an incredible effect on us and have nothing to do with it at the same time? There's nothing I can do about it. It's subconscious. It just acts on me. It's the same. It's the same excuse I use in the present about what I'm doing isn't something I'm creating and causing. It's the same thing. Insanity is thinking we're in it. Well,
Yes.
sanity is seeing there is no in, there is no out. It's an absolute state of present awareness. It's absolutely reassuring. It is warm because light always warms whatever it touches.
Light always warms whatever it touches.
There's a gravestone somewhere I read about in London about a kid who was killed during the bombing during World War II. And the gravestone says, there is no light so small as to be put out.
Oh, that's beautiful. I
So
love
the
that.
idea in the infinite, if the infinite is infinite, the opposite of the infinite is infinite. If the absolute is absolute, the opposite is absolute. It confirms its own nature because it confirms absolutely what it is. So any small piece of it is the whole.
Oh,
The whole is every small piece we can think of. It's all there all the time, in us and without us. And the freedom of that is the awe and the inspiration of the exploration and the potential to channel that, express that in our thoughts by actually knowing that and thinking we know it rather than thinking we don't.
I love that. Love
That's all
that
love.
idea.
It's all love. That's what it is.
Yeah,
That light, that pure light is never takes, it always gives.
it always gives. Yeah,
Because there
that's
is no give and take. There is no give and take in that realm at all. There's nothing to give, there's nothing to take. It's just a present state that we
it's
all
there.
have now. Yes.
And
We
no
can't tap in, we
deficit.
can't tap out. No
No,
options.
no
Yeah.
deficit. No.
Yeah.
Yep.
Exactly. No shortcomings, no defects.
Endless.
Love you, sweetheart.
Love you too.
We'll continue.
Okay.
Thanks for listening, everyone out there. We're happy to have you, and we know you're there.